Welcome to the Growth Ventures podcast, the go-to platform for entrepreneurs, innovators, and changemakers. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. In this podcast, we delve into the world of business, technology, and innovation. We bring you conversations with industry leaders, disruptors, and visionaries who are shaping the future and making a difference. So whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or simply a curious listener, join us on the journey of learning and growth. Welcome to the Growth Ventures podcast. And now, let's delve into today's episode. Welcome to the Growth Ventures podcast, where we explore the intricate world of business, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Hamlet Azarian. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Paul Meinshausen, an esteemed leader and innovator whose expertise stretches across data science, mobile technology, and startup ventures. Living in the vibrant city of Singapore and boasting an educational pedigree from the Middle East Technical University and a research fellowship from Harvard, Paul has spearheaded pivotal roles from being the CEO and co-founder of Aampe to lending the genius as the chief product officer at DT1. He has co-founded PaySense, which saw a remarkable acquisition. His diverse experiences don't just end there. Paul has also invested and supported numerous startups, giving them the push they need in the vast entrepreneurial space. In this episode, we will uncover the nuances of data science, gain perspectives on emerging tech trends, and delve deep into innovative strides Aampe has made under his leadership. So let's dive into our enriching conversation. Paul, thanks for joining us today. Really excited to have you all here on the podcast and really excited of the tremendous insights you'll be able to provide for our listening audience. So wanted to kind of let you know how our podcast flows. It's like, well, for most of the audience who've listened in, we tend to go to the past, then present, into the future. And we're really looking for your personal journey and some of the lessons learned along the way and any stories and anecdotes you could provide, the leaders that are listening in to how you've taken different challenges and you've learned from it. So starting with that, can you, just to give a little bit of background for everyone, what first initially got you excited and interested in data science as a whole?
When I just started to think about the world and kind of what I wanted to do in it very early on, right before going to university, I did an internship with Lockheed Martin in a warfare simulation battle lab. My older brother was a systems engineer there, and so he was able to get me a nice spot. And just the idea of kind of simulating the world and how you would go through it in the context, and that was in the context of warfare, but just more broadly, I think I took from that experience is just really exciting. So then when I went to university, I asked myself sort of what could I study that would take me in the direction of understanding people in different contexts and different environments. So I ended up in a field of anthropology, but in the US, it's often referred to as computational social science. So it's behavioral sciences or social sciences, but that have more of a computational view or a suite of methods that are used to understand the questions being posed. And I did that for a while. Ended up doing research in that in Turkey on a Fulbright scholarship, and then went back and ended up working for the U.S. Department of Defense, building data inference systems for conflict environments, places like Afghanistan, based in DC, in the DC area. Then went back to do my PhD and always thought I would go in a research direction because I was really just interested in questions and understanding. And then this was sort of the time when data science was becoming a particular thing that you could do as a profession. I think the concept has always been there as long as we've had technology, as long as we've had businesses, et cetera. But it was formulated more specifically in terms of, well, let me ask interesting questions, and then using data represents people's behavior, and then update the product and the technology that make the software change because of it. And so what was really exciting at that time, 2011, 12, 13, was that you could do that in a way just as rigorously, but far more ambitiously than we ever could in academia. So in academia, if you're on a PhD track or a research track, you're really always asking yourself, how can you generate data? Where does the data come from? How can you put people in situations that you can understand them better? Whereas, in Silicon Valley and other places, technology was all of a sudden allowing us to capture way more than we ever could in an academic position, and do it more rapidly and expansively. And so that was just exciting to me. So I ended up leaving the academic path and went straight into consumer technology in general, and software really specifically, and into data science roles.
That's amazing. So were you always curious? Like genuinely when you were younger, you were always curious into human behavior and how people acted, and that kind of served as sort of the catalyst for you to go through that academically? Is that where it all started, or where did that curiosity stem from?
I think if we could answer that particular question, then we would both have a many billion-dollar business. So I'm not entirely sure, but I do know that. So for example, before university, actually when I was very young, I went to a Montessori school until I was about 6 or 7. But after that, I never went to school again until university. I was in the U.S. It's called homeschooling. I think there's many flavors of it. Ultimately, it just really means you don't go to an established institution, a place. So I just had a lot of freedom, and I never ever had a problem with that freedom in the sense that I was never really needing to look for an assignment to be given. I was just exploring the world, and
so whatever you were curious in, you were able to explore, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Very loose structure, and that has its downsides. And I now have 2 small children. I often ask myself about their education, but it also has its upsides, and I'm very grateful for those. But that curiosity just kind of came very early, and drove me to ask questions, and made me just want to be out and out in the world.
That's amazing. So that curiosity eventually led to the academic pursuit, and that still curiosity was there. And then now you couple it with data. Now you have actual science behind it, right? Like you have the numerical findings of the what if questions per se, or if this changes, what can come from it.
Yeah, actually, one of my first applications outside of the internship at Lockheed Martin that I mentioned was my first summer in university. I went, I did a study abroad for the summer in Portugal. And a big portion of that, over a month, was out in the Alentejo region of Portugal, a very rural part of Portugal, a small village. And I was on an archaeology dig. And it was just a very small dig. It was on this little hill next to this little village. And we were just excavating a particular sort of, called a dolma, but it's just a kind of burial crypt. And the thing is that is a form of data science, really, because what you're doing is you're carving back the layers of earth, and you're tracking everything about where each piece is positioned in that setup, in that environment of that hilltop site. And then you're recording it, and then you're trying to make inferences about human behavior, past behavior based on the positioning, right? So it's archaeology. You don't think of archaeology normally. You don't think of archaeology as data sciences, so at least it's more like Indiana Jones or something. But to me, it was, because that's what we were doing. We had a representation of people in the form of this site. And that's similarly now we have.
I love that. I love how you're taking anthropology and you're saying, here's the data, here's the historical, here's the information I'm gathering. And from that, I'm able to think through or infer exactly what they were thinking, or where they're going, or how they were living. That's phenomenal. That's a great way of explaining it.
Yeah. And now we just do the same things, but with that, not instead of a burial site, it's a website, right?
Right.
But that's what it is. It's some past representation of behavior, and then you're trying to extrapolate forward or ask additional questions about what people were doing and thinking.
Very, very cool. Can you describe a project where you worked on recently or in the past that had like social implications, and like we can dig a little bit into that? Is there like a particular project we could talk about?
So tell me a little bit more what you mean by social implications. I could interpret that so broadly. I want to make sure I understand.
So let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get involved into the military? How did you get, you went from academia and started working for a little bit with the U.S. Department of Army, and can we
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I was in Ankara in Turkey, finishing my Fulbright, finishing a master's degree at Middle East Technical University, and I had another fellowship called the Bourne Fellowship, named for a former senator, and it required us to do, as part of the fellowship terms, it required you to do some kind of public service, some government service anywhere in the government. And I was just sort of trawling the site that they'd put together for that to kind of help fellows find those roles that would allow them to serve their 1 or 2 years of service and maybe even follow that path. I was pretty open at the time. I didn't have a clear view of what I wanted to do. And there was this new team the Department of the Army put together, a kind of computational analysis team that was really focused on irregular warfare. And this is 2007, 8, when I'm sitting in Ankara thinking about this. This is, Iraq war is still going on. War in Afghanistan is ramping up. And it was clear that it wasn't a conventional war, and it wasn't something that you could just understand by understanding how many tanks the enemy had or something. There was no tanks, and there wasn't really an enemy. I mean, you could put people on a chart, but really the conflict itself was constantly just emerging from bystanders and people who casually become involved, and insurgencies that are intermixed with corruption and conflict and all these things. So it's just a complex environment. The team was called the Complex Environments Team. So I just saw a brief write-up for this. They put it together very rapidly. They were just, everything was, go, go, go. And I responded, and they were interested in my profile, and I joined. That's actually an important part of my story, because I was the first member on the team. The second member of the team was a guy who just finished his PhD in cognitive anthropology, and also had the same fellowship, of course. And we both came together, and actually Sean is now my co-founder at Aampe. And we stayed. So I left. We both left after 2 or 3 years in that team, but stayed close, and that was a very formative experience, I think, for both of us. So he joined and ended up in this situation, and it was a very enlightening situation for me, because in research and in behavioral science, we like to pose questions about people, and then like to kind of do some small experiments and try to answer those questions. And based on all of that, hopefully you can actually take action. Like that's an indicator that you have real knowledge. And in Afghanistan, we were just out of idea. None of the research really was practically applicable. It wasn't really tangibly actionable to reduce this conflict. Right. And so instead, what we were asking is, well, we're generating data all over the place: satellite imagery, improvised explosive device, incident, notes, human information. So people who would be reporting something in their village or town or city or something, and it would be in text. So we'd have text data and large scale, all kind of very unstructured, large scale data. And the question was, all right, can we use this can we model it to help us engage on the terrain more effectively? So that's how I got involved. It was very accidental. I never thought I was going to go into military work or defense work. I come from a military family and had left and sort of actively decided not to do that. And then I found myself back in it.
Obviously this was a new field, a new team. So what were some early challenges you guys were facing, and how did you guys go about solving them?
Oh man. So there's such a range that is representative, I think, of everything I've experienced everywhere else. So first of all, there's organizational problems. So you're in a military, which is a bureaucracy. It's an extremely large bureaucracy. And it's a very structured organization. So it's all about rules and following rules and doing things in established ways, and all about hierarchies. So chain of command, big concept, right? And so it was a challenge to take a bunch of people from more academic research, computational backgrounds and put them into that organization and get them to follow those rules while also doing things differently enough to actually be effective at what they were asking you to do, right? So there was just a lot of communication problems in terms of sort of taking traditional analysts and be like, wait a second, what if we approach the problem differently? Or what if we captured this kind of data? So that was an organizational communication problem. That's easily one of the most important things that determined the extent to which we were able to be successful. And then you have technological problems. So this is a defense role. So a lot of it was dealing with classified data. It was in secure environments. And so what that meant was that, as a data scientist, you need as anybody, you need tools to do the job. Now, historically, they've cleared software like Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel, right? Like those things are approved, they're validated, et cetera. You have them in your secure environment on your secure technology. But those are the tools we needed. We needed tools like R and Python and programming. And then that was a new team, so they didn't realize it. So we had a lot of struggles getting our software into position to be able to do the things we needed to do. So there's those two. And then we had modeling problems, extremely complex environments, moving, just sort of time problems of the world is changing constantly. If you model something 6 months ago, does it remain true? How would you know? How would you establish a causal connection between two things? Not just that they're correlated, but that there was some kind of causality. If there's no causality, it doesn't matter. Like if you interdict or intervene on the supply of fertilizer, and the fertilizer isn't what's causing the improvised explosive devices to be successful, then it doesn't matter. You can cut off the fertilizer, they correlate, you cut it off, and the improvised explosive devices continue to proliferate because they used something else. They replaced the material, right? So how do you make these? So a lot of modeling statistical problems. So I guess those are three families of problems that I continue to face today. But it was a great environment to be kind of go through the forge.
So when you look back upon it, obviously the organizational components of it, the tooling problem of it, the bureaucracy component would slow down your learning capabilities of what's working, but you got past those. Then you got into where the meat of the problem was which was the modeling stuff, right? How do I take all this unstructured data and try to make some inference off of it? How do I learn from this? Was there anything that you, at least in that aspect of it, you guys figured out and you're like, oh, this is an interesting learning that helped, for you later on when you were looking at other non-military problems, kind of rethink about? Like, was there anything like that came about through that experience?
There were modeling approaches and tools that I learned in order to deal with that data that have continued to be relevant and useful for me as I go. In terms of findings, I think there were some things that we discovered that were potentially really important about, for example, how IEDs are constructed and how they're effective in a conflict environment like Afghanistan. However, I don't, to a certain extent, right? In order to know if you've accurately identified something, you do have to change the world with it, right? You can't just say, it's not history in the sense that you can just come up with a story that explains something. If you want to know that it's actually an effective and an accurate and useful model, then you have to intervene in the world to change the world and see that you're actually able to produce the change that you think you're able to produce. And I don't think we ever got to the point where we were able to intervene sufficiently in the world to cause that to be, that learning to happen. It was still just too much of the organizational side, just too much of current practices side. I mean, crazy stuff. When I was in Kabul, we were making a lot of progress. There was a particular general in charge of the Operation Enduring Freedom, the entire ISAF thing, a guy named Stanley McChrystal. He was famously fired during that period after having his staff speak inappropriately about the political leadership and President Obama during a trip to France. So that kind of thing is like all of the programs that you're on assume a particular organizational structure, and then with one with one crazy event and a Rolling Stone article, all of that is sort of thrown off. So now you have to deal with a new leadership structure. You have to reconvince people of certain things, et cetera. So I think what I learned is the world is so complex, and it's extremely rare when you get to actually intervene and then see it work and then kind of know that you caused that thing. And that actually is what drove me, that insight of sort of saying, wow, we are so close. I think we actually know something. We could change the world in a particular precise way. And then to go back into academia where that just wasn't the case because of other organizational problems with academia, et cetera, was just so unsatisfying for me. So it was just sort of, yes, I went back. After that role, I went back and I thought I was going to do my PhD. I was in a university and then just said, I'm not going to do this. This is not where I can actually change some aspect of the world. And then that drove me even further. I was like, I can't just go into private sector work just anywhere in the economy, because again, I won't have the control to actually drive a change that I could track. And so that's what pulled me towards early stage technology, because there, you have to win. Otherwise you don't have a business and you're in control. There's no huge organizational overhead and it's just you in the world, and you better make it work. And if you don't, it means you didn't know what you thought you knew.
I think that's a great transition. So let's kind of, in this part of your career now, I guess we're reaching about like 5 years after your military experience, right? Now it's the founding of PaySense. Can you like talk to me a little bit about that? And as you kind of begin PaySense, you've made the decision to, is this your first startup at this point now?
It's my first startup that I've co-founded, that I was previously. So just one quick context is that when I left academia, I didn't just leave academia. I also left the US and moved to Singapore. And then 8 months after moving to Singapore, I moved to India. And so I was in Mumbai and I was at different roles, but I ended up at this very fast growing real estate startup called housing.com, backed by SoftBank, a crazy ride. And then started, PaySense. The idea of PaySense was that we had a huge population in India that didn't have really reliable or effective access to credit instruments, to things like small loans that would allow them to kind of build a financial path to greater prosperity. And there was an opportunity to use technology to try to help reduce and solve for that problem. And that was
And is this microloans? Is this consumer?
Well, it depends on what you mean by microloans. Microloans has a lot of connotations to it. In the very small sense, what are usually called microloans would be, a few dollars a day or some very small amount that's like extremely rural populations in places like India or Bangladesh, et cetera. Often it's called microfinance. That's, pushed usually with a nonprofit context, World Bank, et cetera. We were not doing any of that. We were very much in urban environments, and it was very much a profit business. But it was small loans. But in India, dollar amounts are different in terms of their impact and their purchasing power, et cetera. So, so in the U.S. context, it would be loans of a few $100s to low thousands that we were trying to provide.
Got it. And then, so you were looking at consumer behavior. You were determining based off of that how much loan they should get approval for. I'm guessing is some of the things that you guys.
Yeah. So I am. Yeah. A lot of times we wave our hands and talk about these terms. I always like to be super precise. What we had is basically to sort of say, well, one, fundamentally, this population of people, they are poor. They're just entering the white collar kind of workforce, places like call centers, back-end software providers. And they were kind of leapfrogging the computer and did in India straight to the phone. And so this is the early days. This is, maybe 5, 6, 7 years into the concept of the smartphone. The App Store was created in July of 2008, I think. So, yeah, something like 5 or 7 years, I guess, into this. And the concept was that building an application that someone could just simply download onto their phone and using a process where they could fill out some certain information, we could evaluate them for credit and provide that loan. Now, in the traditional, conventional sense, the way you apply for a loan is using established financial instruments, sort of data that's compiled by credit rating authorities based on your previous lending behavior, et cetera. So that's the form, that's the way you do it. That's the way risk models are developed. Things like the FICO score, right? Experian and these companies. In India, they had something similar, a CIBIL score, but something like 60 or 70% of our applicants didn't have that score. So we didn't.
They still hadn't developed it, or they didn't have the.
That's right. They hadn't taken a formal loan before. And so that wasn't reported on. So there was no past repayment behavior and loan application behavior. So, but the concept was that in India, we digitalized quite fast. And so even if they were doing small transactions and if they had a bank account, which they could as part of their job, and they would have the bank account, right? And what would happen is that in India, you have this thing called two-factor authentication. And related to that, basically everything you did you'd immediately be sent a sort of digital receipt in the form of an SMS. So you try to withdraw money from the bank, you got an SMS that confirms that you did that. You made a small a food delivery purchase, you get an SMS that confirms you made that purchase. And you got that notification, you got an SMS from the ride hailer, the Uber or the food delivery app, or you got it from the bank. And you always get it from the merchant and from the bank, and that would go right to your SMS inbox. And so we wrote the application in a way that our SDK, our software development kit that would go in that was in our app, would have access, and the user and the customer would give us permission to read that SMS inbox. And we would take 60, 90 days of those SMSs, and we would convert those into structured financial data that kind of represents your just day-to-day spending behavior, as well as kind of link that to the balance information associated with your bank.
That's very cool. How did you guys, so I'm sure as you guys thought through this concept and you're like, all right, what were some of the early challenges in one, forming the team, and two, thinking through how you could potentially solve this kind of problem? And what did you guys go learning from that experience?
So many technical problems around how do you ensure that you have access to that SMS inbox, and then, that you can read it. And then you have just all kinds of problems like, did that person actually just regularly delete their SMSs? Or do they delete specific SMSs, for example? So you'd get this record and you'd get it at scale because we're dealing with very quickly hundreds of thousands and then millions of people. So you're really dealing with modeling that it at scale. And you have to ask these questions about the data generating process. Where did the SMS come from, and why might there be gaps in it or issues with it? And then on top of that, you have, once you kind of, as you figure that out, you also have a modeling problem in the sense that you have these small bits of text. But what you need is even smaller bits within the text. So you get a message that says, hey, you spent 100 rupees on this date, your remaining balance is 4,000 rupees. Like, what you need to know is that they spend 100 rupees on that date. And so from that text, you have to extract that, it was 100 rupees sent. Another SMS sent a little while later might say 500 rupees is deposited in your account. You got to get that right. You got to get the 500 was in and the 100 was out, right? And so it's just raw text. You have to extract the structure from the text and put it into a different data set that you can do the model over, because the model can't handle raw text. It's way before the days of sort of large language models like we use with ChatGPT, which just sort of, you can very rapidly extract that. We didn't have that at the time.
Right.
And so we had to build the specific models that would say, all right, let's take this text out and let's represent it as a debit. So there's all of that. And then once you do that, now you have a new problem, which is, all right, so now I've got an semi-accurate representation of this person's spending on a day-to-day basis. But how do you build a risk model off of that? Because that's not how normal risk models are built. They're not built based on your day-to-day spending. They're built based on your previous repayments on a monthly rate, usually, of past loans. So anyway, kind of getting into the weeds here, but a lot of just very specific kind of statistical modeling problems here that we just had. We had to put into software and then build on top. Ultimately, we were able to do it well enough to drive it and kind of make our app one of the top in the market, and really be really pervasive in India.
That's phenomenal. So eventually this obviously led to it getting acquired. And did that help you then transition into, or were you already at that time an angel investor, and were you already starting to work with other startups? How did that transition begin for you? When did you start saying, okay, now how can I help other startups that are trying to solve problems, and how can I provide, value back in terms of what they're working on?
As it became clear that PaySense was going to be successful financially as a business, and as with a startup, your role changes so rapidly. What you're doing, what you're focusing on, are you writing code? Are you kind of trying to find people to hire to write code? Are you helping them be successful? Are you communicating with partners, risk officers who are still underwriting, and they're the source of the capital? So many different kinds of problems. And as my role shifted away from really focusing on building the initial platform towards higher level communication issues, et cetera, I was still very attracted to the early stages, the very beginnings of the problem. And so I started to help and advise an early stage fund in India. And I would regularly look at startups and talk to founders as part of that fund's decision process. And then eventually I just started to realize that, hey, I'm seeing some founders who I would love to be, to support and be along for the journey, and et cetera. So I started writing small checks, and then started to write them more regularly, more large, as then the acquisition of PaySense happened, and I was able to take an exit, as in receive a windfall amount of cash. Kind of changed my life. For me, what wasn't exciting was to go kind of buy a Porsche or something. It really changed my standard. I already had a great standard of living. I was fine. And so I wanted to take some portion of that and continue to invest it. And for me, at first, it was really much more of a learning opportunity. It was just a vicarious experience process. It's just like you could see and hear and talk to people doing this over again in a way that I you can't run many startups by yourself. And even deciding to build another company was a big decision. So for then, it was just great to be a very small part of it by writing angel checks. And so that's how
I love that, by the way, that your early childhood of learning and your curiosity, even till now, when you became an angel investor, was still there. And that was like the guiding principle that you were kind of following, was like, how can I learn? How can I be involved? How can I be involved in a small, impactful way?
Yeah.
Is there specific things you look for in like the startups that excite you, or is there, most angel investors that we talk to, they always say it's really about the founder, and there's something about the founder that connects with them. Is it similar for you, or is it also the problem that they're going after that excites you as well too?
It's a combination. It's a complex decision process. I think if you think about, again, the data origination problem here, you only ever invest in the startups you see, right? So a big portion of it is what's called deal sourcing or deal flow. Is like, which deals do you see? Well, you're not going to see all of them, and for sure. And so the process that determines which deals you see is usually what determines where you invest. And you can say it's about the founder, but it's really about the founder plus the space, because you're going to only see certain kinds of deals. What determines what you see? Well, some combination of what you've done in the past and what you know, because usually early stage founders are don't necessarily want just a check from anybody. Like it's disconnected money when it's a $25,000 or $50,000 or even a $5 or $10, especially when it's a $5 or $10,000 check. You don't just want lots and lots of small checks from just anybody, because it's just, it's a strange process, right? So you have to trust that they know the process. Why are they putting money in? What's in it?
You want a value add investor. You want someone that can help.
I hesitate to say value. Yeah, I hesitate to say value add because I think that term is so overused and it's and really vague as well. But the point is that there has to be some connection there, right? And so usually it's that, oh, you know this. So I knew data, I knew machine learning and software, data sites of software really strongly. And so that tended to be the kind of companies that would reach out to me. And then increasingly, I knew particular kinds of investors at VC funds that would continue to ask me, hey, this founder is really exciting. Can you take a look, and chat. And especially as I started Aampe 3 years ago now, and now my full-time job is building another company. It's extremely, takes my time. I have a small family now. So now my deal flow is entirely from people I've co-invested with in the past, and especially early stage funds. And so that determines it. And then of course, once you look at the deal flow, then you make a decision based on when it's at a very early stage check, there's really nothing else involved. So there'll be a deck or some material or small demo, right? But a series of slides don't speak to you. A person speaks to you, and it's really all about why they're doing it, where they came from, and how they see the set of problems ahead. And that either resonates with you and gets you excited, or it doesn't. It's a very intuitive process. It's not. I've never found it useful to frame it as a kind of a clear template and structure, because I just think there's so much complexity there that kind of trying to put a template on it is artificial.
What's one of the most, like, going back to the learning component of it, what's one thing, what's a startup that you have been an angel in that you've actually like learned some interesting things from it in their process of trying to figure out product to market fit?
So, I don't think I've never made an investment that I didn't learn from, because you learn. I guess if you have a particular approach to the world, you just learn from the experience, the fact that it failed, the fact that it succeeded, all those details. I'll give a particular example. One of the startups I've invested in that has done the best, that's really done quite well, is a company called Supabase. It is a kind of an open source Postgres service offering, an open source Firebase, serverless backend. There's a lot of different ways you can position the product, but they've been extremely successful, very popular. After I invested, they went on to YC. They're now one of the top 100 YC companies. And I knew the founders pretty well. They were friends with my wife. And then I met them. And then when the CEO started the company, absolutely. I think I was the first or maybe second check in. Watching them do things over the years has been amazing. I actually was just at an office. They're a fully remote global company. And I dropped in on an offsite that they had in this region of Southeast Asia in earlier this year, and spent a couple days there, and so seeing them build this company fully remotely, globally, and manage the process. I think they've also done amazing content and really demand generation in terms of just getting people to think about what they were offering and the underlying problems it solved for. So much learning. So it's both on the organizational side as well as on the technology side. Really cool stuff.
That's amazing. So now let's transition into Aampe. So obviously you had the success with PaySense, and then where did the idea of Aampe come around? And can you talk a little bit about what Aampe does for the listening audience?
Yeah. So the idea from Aampe man, it's been percolating, I think, as long as I've been thinking about how we understand behavior. But more specifically, it's based on my sort of the last 10 years experience specifically with consumer mobile applications. And there's two parts to it. One is, how does the technology learn about you as a customer and as a user? And what do you need for it to be able to do in terms of the infrastructure and the way that software is designed to enable that application to actually learn about you as a person and respond to you? So kind of this concept of artificial intelligence, but I think it's almost interesting. It's like the older term in some ways is more accurate, the term of machine learning, because we don't just want some universal intelligence. And that's anyway a myth. Like, that doesn't exist in the world, because the world is constantly changing and people are constantly changing. Just think about like humans. If we are the barometer or the measurement for artificial intelligence, well, then that's not a great thing, right? Because most people don't know anything about the people around them, right? We struggle to even understand our life partners, our spouses, or our children, right? And predict what they're...
No, that never happens. We never get in 5 whatever.
That's right. Never a disagreement. We always know exactly what to buy for their birthday. So clearly there's a fundamental problem here, but we are able to do it relatively well, right? Like, that's what has allowed human society to flourish, to dominate. Civilization is based on effective learning and communication, especially between people. The thing is just that it doesn't scale very well. When I think about like the most successful people I've worked with in the world, this general who in Afghanistan who led all U.S. and international forces, or my advisor at Harvard University was a very well-known professor who flied all over the world speaking to corporations. I think about those, or really successful founders that I know now, or investors. You see them as an individual. What you often don't see is this fleet of people behind them who are guiding and serving them in order to help them make the decisions that they make best in the field that they make best. So you could call it like they're extremely leveraged. They don't make lots of decisions in order to make a few decisions well. Assistants, right? And so they're able to flourish, right? But we're a globe of 7 billion something people. You can't have everybody have 4 or 5 assistants behind them. That's not logical, right? Because who's the assistants to the assistants? All right. And so the idea here is that ideally it's like this phone that we carry around in our pocket, this piece of compute, this piece of technology could hopefully help us do things better in our lives, make better decisions, make faster decisions, be more efficient, learn things quicker. It could do that. It could take the place of other people, of assistants, right? But for it to do that, it has to be able to learn the same way an assistant would, or learn differently, but basically be able to arrive at the same capability. So what Aampe is doing is a particular kind of statistical learning and infrastructure to allow them to do that. And then in terms of the applications, the thing that would make more sense to most people is the format in which most apps engage with people now is through short form messaging. And so Aampe provides a software that lets marketers and product managers make better decisions about how to do and run that messaging.
So this is people using Braze or any type of notification system.
Yeah. So Braze. Yeah. So a lot of times this field of work is called lifecycle marketing or CRM. And the standard CRM conventional platform would be a company like Braze. There's many, many, many more, but Braze is one of the more well-known, really a great product in that class of software. And so that's what they would do. Now, what Braze is under the hood is basically a rules engine. That's an old school software term, but what it really just means is software as a bunch of if-thens. And you program those if-thens. And you say, if a person comes into my app and does this, then send them
this onboarding flow, or send them, these are the sequences of things.
Yes, exactly. So there's a bunch of conditions that determine whether that message should be sent. And then the thens, which is the construction of the message and the sending of it. And it's all these if-thens, which are all discrete, static, programmed rules. And those rules don't scale. So that's what happened. That's why we end up in a scenario where everybody gets, millions of people get sent the same message because they all fell into the same bucket, the same, what we call a campaign or use journey. And then they do the thing and then they get the message. It's very static, formulaic. That's how, because under the hood is a rules engine that just can't handle complexity. So AMP replaces that rules engine with a probabilistic learning engine that conditionally generates messages and sends those.
So does it create new messages too,
responding,
or
it can, yeah. So there's different ways of thinking about the creation process. You can use the technology to generate lots of possible versions in advance, and you can also have it iteratively create as you go. That'd be more the way a chatbot works, or when you use ChatGPT or something like that, you're Bard. It's making it up as it goes, right? Now, there's a lot of problems with that. If you've used Bard or ChatGPT, you realize that it can say some wild things, it can say some extremely inaccurate things. Not just it can, but it will. And so there's some technological problems we have to solve for to make it reliable.
So Aampe at its essence, what it allows is product managers and marketers to get to a point where you no longer need necessarily the traditional rules engine, but you can use the platform to get to a much more personalized experience for each user on your product or platform. Is that a good summation of it?
That's right. Yeah, that's great.
Very, very cool. And then so you obviously this idea was more or less percolating inside of you for a while, and then you, at what point did you feel like, okay, I'm ready to try to solve this? But this is a big problem, right? Like if this is the holy grail. If you're able to solve this is incredible. Like the personalization of one, or the personalization, it's all of marketers or product managers' dream. So
yeah. So okay, so here's the thing. What we often don't think, we have this misconstrued notion of learning, right? And it comes a lot from even how our education system is constructed. And probably, so this goes back for me way early to my days in a Montessori school. And I actually became really interested in that later in life and went back and read a lot about Montessori because I wanted to understand, why was it constructed the way it was? But here's the thing. You can think about education as two different ways. You can think of it as learning from history, right? Whatever happened. And so that's the textbook, and it tells you the answers to the questions, and it gives you the questions too. It tells you the right questions to ask. Here's your math problem. What's the answer? Well, the question is in the problem, right? So, or, the quiz, a question about history, and then it has the answer, right? So everything is known and everything has answers. And that's perceived as learning. That's kind of analogous to how some machine learning works, which is just reads everything that exists, and then it kind of tries to tell you what represent that history in some way, right? But a different form of learning, which I think is actually real learning, is trying things. It's making a change in the world and then seeing what happens. That's more akin to what science is about, right? You formulate a hypothesis. You said, well, if I did this, if I added this liquid to this other liquid, chemistry, or if we, inserted this into this structure, or we tried this, something else would happen, right? You try things. And in our lives, we do that. We don't, you can read all the Yelp reviews or Google reviews of restaurants you want, but until you try the restaurant, you don't know anything about it, right? So you go and you try and you eat there. Now, when we write software, we write it more in the old form of education of, here's all the rules, here's all the things we know, and here's what it should do. And that is, if we actually want the technology to be able to learn the way we do as humans, we have to let it try things. We have to let it experimentally engage with the world and then observe the response and then update. And so, that is the core problem, is actually letting the software itself make mistakes and try things and then update what it does based on learning the result of what it tried.
It's very cool. So it's almost, in essence, like us as growth marketers, we want to run consistent growth experimentations. So is the software allowing itself to do that? Like it could build its own hypothesis?
That's exactly right. So
that is really cool.
That's right. So the normal thing for a marketer to do is they know that they don't have all the answers. They know that the new thing that they want to promote is a new thing. So classically, you would run an experiment. You would do something called an A/B test where you try, well, we could frame the problem in A, or we could frame it as B. We could say, this is a really convenient application, or we could say this is a really excellent application. Two different value propositions, convenience, excellence. We could run an A/B test. The problem is that the world is so complex that a simple A/B is never really the question. It's always A, B, or C, or D, or A, or F, or Z, and it's based on time, and it's based on the person and their background and how they arrived in your product. So what we want is to not make it where you have to set up the A/B test, you construct it, you statically run it, you look at the results, then you update it. We want a much more real-time, like kind of constantly learning process. And so that's more, in technical terms, you use things like bandit algorithms, but also things like reinforcement learning, where you're just parallelizing and you're just, right, we've got an app with 1 million users. Why shouldn't we be running thousands of tests constantly? And then also actively making decisions based on those tests. So in a classic A/B test, you run the test, you look at the results, and then you say, oh, well, we learned this. Let's go program that learning back into the rules. And that had so much overhead in the going from learning to action to decision, process. It's so slow. It doesn't represent how fast the world is moving. And so what we want, again, is for the model to do it itself.
That's amazing. So it does multi-arm bandits, it sounds like. It does all of these more sophisticated type of experimentations. And is it doing this? What type of guidance, I guess, as a product manager, are you helping it? Are you helping steer it in some way, or how are you actually?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to put in strategic guidelines. You might have brand voice in terms of saying never talk like this, or never, never describe the product this way. There's all kinds of roles. It's just that you want to, once you set those rules, you want it to do what it does in between. I think at least for me, the easiest way to think about it has always been in the world of financial trade, like the public markets trading. Most people know a little bit about how that works. Maybe they've seen, movies like The Big Short, or they've seen, some kind of story about this world, right? Historically, you have something like Wall Street in the 80s. And what do you have? You have like this big floor of people, everybody yelling, buy this, to sell this, I've got this selling, right? And how do they make those decisions, right? Behind the hood, what they're doing is they have an analyst who goes and reads all the earnings reports and then makes a decision that I think we should buy this stock because the company's doing well. And in their last earnings report, they said this, and the CEO said this, right? And now, and that's how trading was done, right? And so it's a process. You do the research to make the trade, you observe the trade, and then you have to decide. You have to constantly decide, should I sell now? Should I sell now? Should I sell now? It's going up. No, it's going down. Should I sell, right? All these, it's just a constant process, right? And what we've seen is over time is more and more we move towards what's called algorithmic trading, where you don't do research and then buy a stock and then sell the stock. You have a model software that is observing stock. It observes a bunch of data about that stock, and then it makes a decision. It buys, and then it makes a decision to sell. Now, is it still guided by the fund, by the people, the traders behind the scenes? Absolutely. They're still kind of giving it direction. They're still structuring it in a way, but they don't make the micro decisions about, I'm going to buy now and sell now. Like that's model and algorithm and software driven and handled. So similarly, you've got an app with millions of people. You shouldn't be making a decision about sending a message to this user right now. and this other user at, another time. So the thing is like the software needs to not just learn, it needs to act. It needs to do the trade. And in our case, it's sending the message. And that's called programmatic, right? It has to programmatically, the program itself decides to do the
It sounds phenomenal. It sounds like a incredible product. And so how long has it been now in the market, and what are some of the early things that you guys are seeing as a group, and what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned so far?
We started the company in the summer of 2020, and we started to build a lot of the, to really design the solution and sort of ask ourselves what was needed and what was required. And that took some time. We were fortunate enough to find some really cool apps in the region where I am, in Southeast Asia and India, who were willing to work with us in order to let us test our hypotheses about the right way to design this problem very early. And then we started to bring that to market and really sell it really the end of last year, beginning of this year, and bring it to more apps, and see how it works, roll it out, and then continue to update it, understand our customer population, these CRM folks and CMOs and others, to understand what they were thinking about it and how they would perceive it. I mean, it's and this is kind of to reference what I was talking about early on, there's a huge human element here. It's not just a technical problem. It's an adoption problem. It's how do people interact with probabilistic systems? How do they interact with AI? And like that it's a really important determinant of success. So yeah, but we've been successful in the sense that with the app that we've been running, we've shown how much better it is than the older way of doing things. And increasingly, we have larger and larger apps and more apps that are using us now across the world. We have apps that use us in the US and Europe and Asia, hopefully very soon in Latin America as well. And you just keep building and iterating.
Amazing. Well, Paul, thank you so much. And if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to kind of connect if they want to? Is it LinkedIn, or is another method you prefer?
Yeah, they can always reach out on LinkedIn. I'm on less often on Twitter these days, or X, but still there every once in a while. I think my email is generally available. They can reach out through the app website. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that concludes our enlightening conversation with Paul Meinshausen, as we, talked about his career. We delved into the insights on data, mobile, and startups, and pondered what the future might hold, especially with everything he's working on today. And in this fast-paced world of tech and business, change is the only constant. So keep learning, stay curious, and never stop pushing your limits. A big thank you to Paul for sharing his journey and insights, and to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you found value in this conversation, please leave us a review, and don't forget to subscribe for more episodes with industry leaders and vision.